First of all, thanks everyone for joining us again. This is another excellent um, alumni series event. We're really thrilled to have Greg Hamilton with us. Just a quick intro about Greg. After completing his BA in economics at Queen's University, Greg joined SFU to pursue his master's degree and graduated from the program in 1997. Greg brings with him a wealth of experience in real estate, asset management, having spent a long career working in the industry with various governmental bodies. Currently, Greg is a Property Endowment Fund Manager with the City of Vancouver. So feel free to ask questions either during or after our presentation. It's a wealth of knowledge. One of the reasons why we brought Greg in today is not only is he a respected alumni, but also because he works with the City of Vancouver, and often we've had people come in who've represented federal interests as well as provincial avenues. So this is the first time we've had somebody at a municipal level, and I'm really happy to welcome Greg. Greg?
Thanks, Azam. I wanted to thank you and Carmen for the opportunity today. I'm never a guy that's short on words, but certainly I like to keep in touch with the School of Economics, and I have an interest in ensuring that the grads that are coming out of the school find a good career. And my bias is local, because I do know that many of the grads go on to other places, which is okay. But I've chosen to make my home here in Vancouver and in British Columbia, so I do like to see alumni stay here. So just a little bit of description. This presentation can best be described as what I've been doing since graduation, or maybe how I applied what I learned at SFU. That might be another way to call it. So just a little bit about my background. I wasn't a great student in my undergrad. I think I was a solid C+ student. And at the finish of my undergrad, there was 3 then professors in the Department of Economics at Queen's that were headhunted by Simon Fraser University. And that kind of caught my attention, frankly. So it was Richard Lipsey, Nancy Orwell, and Rick Harris that I think have all moved on from the department now. But in any case, that first got my attention around the SFU MA program, and it was something that even though my undergraduate marks weren't great, I wanted to continue on with education. So I started an application process at SFU and got rejected. So I applied again and got rejected. And I applied again and moved from Ontario to Vancouver. And at that time I got an interview, and who I met with said, "Hey, well, you're pretty determined apparently, but your marks aren't great. So why don't we get you going on some third-year undergrad classes? And if you get A's in those, we can talk again in another semester." So that kind of started me off on my MA program. I ended up getting into the program in 1995 after a full year of kind of qualifying, and then graduated in 1997. So, for those of you, I guess for those of you that are listening that are really worried about marks here, there is another way, and that other way is just don't quit. Frankly, just keep going and talk to people. So, in the spring of 1997, I was kind of wondering what was next for me. Obviously, freshly minted MA grad in economics, I've been quite active in the school, and particularly the SFU Outdoors Club. The logo's since changed since I was involved, but that was it. So I was president in my final year of the SFU club, and I was organizing sort of trips to around British Columbia, which was really fun. But as I was approaching graduation, I was doing the round of interviews, certainly that presented itself. So those were, the federal government, Bank of Canada, Department of Finance, that sort of stuff. I considered going on in with additional school, but kind of felt like the MA was enough for me. And my graduating class wasn't big. There was about 15 of us, I think maybe 20, who a lot of them actually moved internationally, particularly into the United States, to start banking careers and derivatives pricing careers, which at the time were it was sort of a high topic interest. But as I mentioned, British Columbia was really a place that I wanted to stay in. I wanted to start my career here, and so I was kind of left asking myself, so what does one do with an MA in economics? And so if you hadn't figured, those initial interviews with Ministry of Finance and BOC didn't go great for me. So there's no job offers. So I started calling up people in various industries. So I used my own personal network at the time to land some interviews with people that were kind of at the time mid-career, people in their 30s, late 30s and early 40s in various industries. So, I looked at private wealth management. I talked to people in the BC government, which is a theme here that we'll talk about some more. And I also looked out towards municipalities. And one particular sort of information interview I had was with a fellow that was in commercial real estate. And he had a somewhat similar background to me. And he said, you really should give this thing a try. This industry, it's a growth industry, which is what it was in 1997. And there wasn't a lot of then best practices being applied as around sort of financial management and decision making. So I said, I kind of threw that into the hopper and started looking around for commercial real estate related jobs, and ended up at a firm called Urbanics, which was a real estate consulting company that it was quite small. There's about 4 of us, I think. And what we were involved in doing was advising retailers, like big box retailers and or property developers, around what sort of either what locations they should be picking, or what type of retailers, if they're a developer, that they should be looking for. So that probably on the surface of it doesn't sound like a great connection between what I had learned, micro, macro, and other things, but it turned out actually that it was pretty good. So I went, started my first kind of number of assignments with this particular company was looking at retail demand sales forecasting. And so I had to go into kind of the CanSIM databases, use federal government household survey data to predict and otherwise forecast retail sales for particular types of retail categories. So household goods, groceries, furniture, that kind of stuff. And then translate that forecasting activity up into a competitive demand analysis, looking at trade areas that were relatively underrepresented, or geographic areas that were relatively underrepresented, say for a grocery store. And so at the time I counted IGA as one of my clients. I also had some large property developers. So if we go over to the next slide, I've got an example here of one of the centers that I was working on. So this one's called South Edmonton Common. This is on the right, obviously, and this is about a 250-acre site in South Edmonton near the airport. Don't know if anybody's been out there. This thing is, when I was involved in it, it was mostly vacant farmland, but now has been largely built out. And so the work that I was doing over 20 years ago was really in the northern half of this site, and advising the developer what type of retailers they might otherwise look for. And part of the work that I was doing found its way to municipalities, particularly the planning department of the City of Edmonton, that would often look for justifications around a particular built form, or a particular retail tenant type when considering large developments like this one. So at the same time as I was doing this, I was out having a lot of fun. So kind of that mountaineering career or mountaineering interest continued on in British Columbia. And so I got involved socially in the British Columbia Mountaineering Club and some other organizations. So I was, I had kind of the two pieces. The work career kind of felt like it was getting going, and then it had a pretty good handle on stuff to do on weekends, if you will. So after doing that for a little less than 2 years, that analysis piece was interesting, but what I really wanted to do was to kind of be in the room, if you will, where decisions were getting made rather than advising people that would go into the room where decisions are made. So I made a really active choice to start looking around for a new opportunity where I was closer to deal making. And so this is really where this next slide starts to come in. So ended up working for a national commercial real estate brokerage firm, first as the director of research, and then later as a broker in a team environment where we were representing either clients or landlords in business transactions. And that idea of getting involved in team-based decision making was, I absolutely loved it. It was fascinating. It was 100% commission, which was very unusual for me to find myself in, but it was also very, very interesting and ultimately rewarding. So when this was happening, this is kind of the early 2000s, and for those of you that maybe are a little older on the call, you may remember something called the tech wreck, which is sort of that first rise of the internet and the first rise of internet-related companies. There was a large growth followed by a quick collapse, and I really rode that in the private sector. So I was working with at the time clients like Nortel Networks, who made these phone systems and made early internet hardware, and companies like JD Edwards, which were large enterprise-wide software systems. And they were growing very rapidly, and also I found out shrinking very rapidly once the tech wreck hit. So for Nortel in Vancouver, we took them from about 4,000 square feet, a small kind of office down in Richmond, up to 120,000 square feet in under 12 months. And by the time that, so we did a deal with Nortel as a tenant, and there was a building that they were going to move into that was still under construction. And it was still under construction when Nortel went bankrupt. And so we were left trying to sublease the space. It was a pretty strange time. There were staff in Nortel that were leaving the company faster than we could get in touch with. And we actually ran out of people on the real estate side at Nortel to contact about our tenants and their sublease in little old Vancouver. But in any case, we ended up doing a deal with a relatively new company called eBay at the time. And they set up shop. It was their first shop in Vancouver, their first office in Vancouver. And so that was for me, this was pretty interesting as far as sort of, what I was using from what I had learned in my time at the Department of Economics and SFU. It's really decision making, still sort of in that advisory capacity. Although, as I mentioned earlier, it kind of felt I was closer to being in the room and making, next to the people that were making the decisions that mattered, which is, large business decisions involving millions of dollars. So if we go on to the next slide here, the next kind of phase in my career, it was the first time I got headhunted, which was pretty interesting for me. I was about 5 years out of school, and a landlord came calling to me and said, "Hey, I understand that you've been doing some business in Vancouver around tech firms. I've got a building that is totally targeted at tech firms, and we've got a huge vacancy problem." So this is Harbor Center, and if you look down at the bottom, and many of you have probably been there, it turns out SFU is a tenant of Harbor Center, which I thought was pretty cool, and I got the job. So what I was tasked with doing was to fill this building up as sort of the tech recovery started to get underway. And this building is privately owned by a German family. And their Vancouver assets are one of a very, like an international portfolio for them. And the Vancouver assets were underperforming relative to their other assets around the world. And so they were quite interested in seeing revenue stabilize there. And I was part of a larger team that filled that building up in about 36 months. But I was working hard, and I was working. My days would be 6:30, 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. at night. and I'd be chasing tenants. So after that would be dinner, that would be things like the Canucks season's tickets. I went to a lot of games while I was there, and you know, that was it was pretty flashy. It was pretty interesting work, but it was ultimately very, very tiring. And when I finished my very last deal in this Vancouver portfolio, there was a couple of buildings, Harbor Center being one of them. The owners of the owners of the building said, "Hey, Greg, thanks very much. Here's the check. We don't need you anymore." And that was kind of eye-opening for me. It was very financially rewarding, the work that I did with them, but quite unexpected. But in retrospect, I can understand why it happened, and it ultimately was a great thing for me. So a couple of days after, you know, kind of word in the industry got around that I had been let go, and that um, you know, obviously, I was available for more work. And a fellow that I had did a real estate deal with about a year prior, or 2 years prior, when I was a broker, actually, called me up and said, "Hey, Greg, I know this may not be your thing, but would you consider coming to work for the BC government as a real estate manager?" And he said, "Look, you know, I can't promise you it's going to be anywhere near the money that you're making, but I can promise you that there's going to be a great live work balance, and you're going to get involved in some very interesting real estate transactions." And so I kind of thought about it. I took a couple of months to think about it, and agreed to take the job. The job was based in Vancouver, and most of my work group was in Victoria. So let's just we'll flip over the next slide here. Um, this is kind of when you know, when I got into the BC public service, a bit of a light came on for me, frankly, because although when I had graduated, I wanted to stay in Vancouver for relatively selfish reasons, meaning I loved the place, and I wanted to sort of have fun and raise or otherwise have my career in Vancouver. I realized that I was also part of a larger community. And that larger community, in this case, encompasses the entire province. And so when I started to work for the province, um, they put me the first years of work were in northern British Columbia for me. And so basically everything north of Quesnel that was a community that I went into, and I would negotiate real estate deals representing the crown, representing Her Majesty, if you will, or otherwise the BC government. And so there's a lot of different elements to the BC government. So I did deals on behalf of Northern Health, which is the Northern Health Authority. At the time, I negotiated their largest lease in Northern BC, in Prince George, which was the regional office, if you will, or their head office. And that was in the biggest building in the north, actually, biggest office building. I did a lot of deals with the Ministry of Child and Family Development in many communities in the north. And that's really where I really started to become more aware of the value of public service. So there's individuals in MCFD in particular that you know, have extremely difficult and challenging jobs, but are quite devoted to making sure that children are receive the best care possible, and you know, often in very challenging family circumstances. I also did deals with the BC Ambulance Service, so again, another community type of organization or service provider that is funded by the government, that provides critical services to communities. And then also things like the BC Forest Service. So scattered across the north are regional offices. And strangely enough, those aren't owned any longer, although they were constructed by the province and the BC Forest Service quite often. They're now leased. So they had been sold in the early 2000s as a result of a prior government decision. And so those leases would periodically come up, and I'd have to go negotiate with the owners of the buildings. And those owners were quite often the most successful people in their relative communities, who recognized the value of a government lease and a monthly check that had no risk of default. So this kind of period of my career really did, it was sort of a maturing for me, and a realization that, it's not really just about work. It's about making a contribution to whatever community you find yourselves in, and otherwise trying to help people. That, as I mentioned, it was a bit eye-opening for me. So I was also involved in some First Nations consultation, and at least initially in the North. So that position with the BC Public Service led to a two subsequent positions. So if you can go over the next slide. And I became a real estate manager for large real estate assets in Vancouver. So by large, I mean anywhere from 40 to 250 acres. And so the nature of my responsibilities there were to manage the properties for whatever the intended use is. Sometimes there was government tenants in them. Other times the sites were being relatively underutilized. And my responsibility was to ensure that the sites were maintained, but also start to work with larger teams to think about what's next for the sites. So one in particular that you may be familiar with is Riverview Hospital, which is a 250-acre site in Coquitlam that it had been the site of provincial government health-related operations for a century, and it was in the wind-down phase when I became a real estate manager of it. And there is a First Nation that has a very strong claim on that provincially owned land. It's Coquitlam First Nation. And we started a process that continues on to this day about imagining the next use of that public asset being the Riverview lands, but this time seeking to accommodate as best the Crown could the interests of Coquitlam First Nation. And so if you drive by there today, you'll see that there's a number of large public sector buildings that are under construction. And I was involved in those early thoughts around what that land could be used for. So in 2008, 2009, there was a financial meltdown. You may, I don't, it's hopefully it's on your curriculum now. And that was felt here in British Columbia in lots of different ways, but one of them was on the provincial budget. And the then government looked around to find means to raise revenue reasonably quickly. And one of the things that they settled on was a review of their then real estate portfolio with a view towards selling off surplus real estate assets. And this program was called the Release of Assets for Economic Generation. It really got green. It took a while, a couple of years to get greenlit, if you will. And the office was set up in late 2011 or 2012. And I was one of 7. We were called, I think, project officers. But the team itself was it was a totally separate construct, but attached to a particular ministry. And we were reporting up to Treasury Board with a special project that sought to sell real estate. The public facing side of this was that they were underutilized sites that would be released to the private sector for economic generation. And this really landed with me because I had certainly had macro fiscal policy pounded into my head at SFU and in my undergrad. And so I really took this to heart because I saw, the idea of an underutilized public asset and one that frankly, or ones that were not needed in the long run for continuing government operations being released back into the private sector for development. And so that led to me being involved in the sale of many relatively large real estate assets in places like Kamloops, in Kelowna, here in Vancouver, and in Surrey, in other areas. And so what I was doing then was I was working with outside consultants and also if there was tenants for these particular sites, where they would go, and then seeking to actually sell the land. So we would go through a public disposal process. But it turned out that many of the sites that were being offered in the Lower Mainland here ended up being acquired by a new entity called MST. MST is Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish, or sorry, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations that recognized that they had very strong claims on these public assets, rights of ownership. And they saw this program as a means to recover those properties back into their control. And ultimately, they ended up acquiring those, sometimes with the assistance of the provincial government, and otherwise buying them at the then fair market value. So there was again, I was involved in First Nations consultation around that, and I had a very eye-opening day in Kamloops one particular day. So we were in the process of selling, I don't know, it was about a 10-acre site in Kamloops, and we were off to meet the local First Nation. And I don't know, I imagine people haven't been on or close to the Kamloops Band, but their head office now is adjacent to a residential school. And that residential school is occupied by a number of branches of that particular First Nation. And the meeting that I had with the leadership of the Kamloops First Nation was in that building. And I knew a little bit about residential schools, but to actually walk through the hallways of those places, it was totally eye-opening. And we were successful ultimately in doing a deal with that particular band that led to the subsequent disposal of a, I think it was about a 10-acre site. So really, this idea of public service, by this point I had been involved for about 8 years in the public service, and had been working on some really fascinating, interesting, and personally rewarding projects. And so I counted myself pretty lucky. The first tranche of the properties that we had identified and had brought forward for disposition or disposal to the private sector was largely completed, and the then executive director of the program had come to me and said, "Hey, Greg, you may want to start thinking about what's next. You've done a great job here, but there's only so much real estate that we have. You may want to think about looking around." And he did that not really on a personal basis to come and tell me that. It wasn't really work related, but it certainly landed with me. And almost immediately after that conversation, I got a call from another headhunter. So if we can move, I guess, to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit about where I ended up. So it turned out that the City of Vancouver was looking for a real estate manager for their Property Endowment Fund. And this Property Endowment Fund, it's a somewhat, it's not well publicized, but folks that have been either living in the city for a long time or otherwise interested in municipal politics know about it. So the endowment itself was set up in the mid-1970s. And at the time, the seed properties, there was about 150 or 200 properties with a then market value of about $120 million. And the idea behind this endowment fund, which was really quite unique in municipalities in Canada, was that any proceeds of sale from the endowment would be kept in the endowment. And then any recurring revenue that the endowment made as a result of its operations, 50% of it would be kept in the endowment, with the balance being returned to the City of Vancouver on an annual basis to be used at council's discretion. And so this endowment was the catalyst for really some fairly rapid value increases over time, and a new public sector tool for the City of Vancouver and politicians to affect sort of community in Vancouver. And so in the 1980s, there was one very large push that was funded by the provincial and federal governments to increase the quantity of affordable housing. And this may sound somewhat familiar to what we're doing today for those of you that are thinking about either moving or otherwise living in Vancouver or I guess anywhere in Metro. We all know that housing is affordable. Well, there was the same problem in the 1980s. Maybe not to the extent that it is now. But at the time, the federal government was quite active. And so the city of Vancouver was supplying the land. And there was organizations that would come together to operate non-market housing operations. And the federal government would provide funding for them, often that would enable them to secure land from the city of Vancouver under a long-term lease, so for 40, 60, or 99-year terms, pay for the use of that public municipal asset in the form of a land lease payment, and then build a building and then operate a building. And so at the time, kind of in the peak years of the endowment was out buying properties really, and new deals were being done every 6 weeks for a couple of years. And so the proceeds that the endowment would receive from deploying a particular asset would be used to buy another property and so on. And so the value of this endowment grew quite quickly and also slowly. So I came to be involved with it about 6 years ago now, I guess. So in 2014, when I arrived, and the task that I was asked to undertake was to develop a strategic plan to ensure the sustainability of the endowment in perpetuity, and to also bring best practices to the management of the commercial real estate portfolio. So that's what I've been doing. So just to kind of show you an idea of, or give you a sense of scale of this endowment in Vancouver. So if we can go to the next slide. So the endowment right now has about 700 properties in it. The value of that endowment is about $7 billion. There will be we're hiving off, at the City of Vancouver is hiving off about 200 of the assets into a new endowment fund called the Vancouver Affordable Housing Endowment Fund. So, and it has a different mission, if you will, than the Vancouver or the Property Endowment Fund. So the Housing Endowment Fund will be centered first and foremost on continuing to deliver affordable housing to citizens in Vancouver, and to do it in a way with modern tools and modern financing methods and partnerships. So the size of the number of assets that are moving over to this new fund, there's about 14,000 homes on them. And they can take the form of non-market housing sites. They can take the form of cooperative housing, or any of the heavy assistance or supportive housing. I guess it's called supportive housing. And so the endowment itself now, the future of the endowment is going to be a little simpler than what it's been in past years, in the sense that what the Property Endowment Fund will be doing is seeking to assemble sites and developing or otherwise allowing for the development of large sites. So a couple of the properties that you may be familiar with that the endowment either maintains ownership, or rather the city maintains ownership over, but is held in the endowment, or the Olympic Village. So in that is and was City of Vancouver land, and it's held in the endowment. Also False Creek South. So over the last 30 days in particular, there's been a great deal of media focused around that, because those initial land leases that I had described that were done in the early 80s and late 70s are now, they're getting quite close to being ending. And the question becomes, what's next? So this job is tremendously fascinating, amazingly rewarding. And I find myself in an advisory capacity again, just like I was at the beginning of my career, but this time I'm advising politicians about how best to make use of public assets to satisfy the needs of the community that I live in. But the endowment also, just a final word here, the endowment also has a goal to achieve a reasonable rate of return. So there's this mesh between kind of the pure public sector ideas of creating civic benefit or otherwise delivering civic services, and this idea of ensuring that this endowment is infinitely lived. And in order to do that, the endowment needs to generate regular recurring revenue. And we do that, and we pay an annual dividend back to the City of Vancouver. It's now about $9 million a year. And over the last number of years, Council has decided to use that to lower the burden of property taxation for residents. And so last year, I think the property tax increase for residents in the City of Vancouver was 7%. In the absence of the endowment's contribution, it would have been above 9, or sorry, above 8.5%. So the endowment's contribution accounts for about 1.5% of any 1 year's property gain or tax increase. And that's quite unique in the Canadian context. There are no other cities that have something like the endowment. So just, I guess that's where I find myself now. So just to kind of summarize, I think some key points here. SFU created the opportunity for me to build a career and contribute really to my community that I live in, both at a provincial and also municipal level now. The work has been very interesting all the way through. And school, of course, isn't everything. So what I learned, what I learned at SFU that gave me the tools to assist in decision making and critical analysis, but the opportunities that present themselves over one's career, you need other skills in order to capitalize on those opportunities, and those other skills are best found by being involved in your community and being, talking to people and asking people. How can I help? It's a great question to ask people and to actively listen for people. So the public sector, although it may not be quite as financially rewarding as pure private sector careers, there's certainly, I think, a high degree of personal satisfaction for people that recognize the value of public service, and that I've learned that over the last number of years. So that's kind of pretty much what I wanted to say. And I'd like to sort of open it up for questions. We can have a talk about various elements of my career, or things that I see where there might be some opportunities for recent graduates. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Greg. First of all, that was excellent. So we can open up for questions. If you're more comfortable in the chat, please do so. Of course, I have questions as well, but please, I open it up to the audience. Greg, I particularly find, I mean, I sort of took notes all the way through, but I found it particularly interesting that, I'm not saying that I can relate, but I was also an econ student, and I don't think my grades were as good as I wanted them to be. And so you particularly mentioned that you were a C+ student. What do you mean by, how did you become not become a C+? I don't know. How did you manage to get C+ student
How did I
to get
change
into
it up?
this MA program?
Yeah,
but I think that story is interesting because you missed that bridge, and I think it's worth noting.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So yeah, my undergrad, I was C+, B- student, and as I mentioned, I got rejected twice by the MA school, really based on my previous academic performance. But I wanted to. I wasn't quite ready to give it up. I thought that I could get into the school, and frankly talk my way in. And I was looking for an opportunity, and so I had been rejected outright. But I made the move to Vancouver nonetheless. At the time, I was living in Ontario, and I interviewed with the then, I guess it was the Dean of Graduate Studies or the chair of the graduate program at SFU, who interviewed me and listened to what I had to say, and took a chance on me, frankly. And so they put me back into a qualifying program with a third year. I think it was a 331. Maybe it's changed. It was mathematical econ, and which was one of the
Same
harder.
course.
Yeah, it was at the time. I think it was one of the harder courses. And they told me get an A in it, and we'll let you take a fourth year class. And so I did. I worked extremely hard in that class. Mind you, it was a single point of focus because I knew that if I didn't do it, my career would be going in a different direction, and there wouldn't be an MA for me. And so ended up getting the A, and I came back, had another interview at the end of that semester early on, and it was like, okay, well, you got the A. Why don't we try in a fourth year class? And so it was the same thing. And that particular class, actually, the fourth year class, it was taught by Dave Andafato, who I am still friends with. I ultimately became friends with him. And Dave, as you know, is a vice president, or you may not know, is a vice president at the U.S. Federal Reserve in St. Louis now. And he had a similar path where, he'll tell you he was a drywaller in East Vancouver and Burnaby. And he applied himself he was working as a drywaller, and came back and ultimately did a PhD, I think, at the University of Western Ontario, but then came back to his undergrad school here at SFU and taught, and that's where I came across him. And as a result of being taught by him, and showing that I was capable of I guess free thinking and some good results in the program. In his fourth year class, I got into the MA program. And Dave and we still chat. I was tweeting with him yesterday.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Yeah, we hope to have David Andolfo. I know him as well. Maybe come in for a speak, particularly regarding Bitcoin. So that'll be interesting. He's a resident expert.
Yeah, he's if you don't have him on Twitter, he's fascinating. Yeah.
Sorry, other questions?
I'm really curious who Dude is.
Yeah. As am I.
Come on, Dude, you got to take your mic off. Nope.
So Greg, you had mentioned another thing here, which was again the don't quit, talk to people. I see this as a theme, not only with you, obviously, with many people, and I'm sort of interpreting it as networking. Yeah. First of all, how did you network back then, and what are your recommendations on networking now?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Networking is that. So there's your work, but there's also who you are as a person, and that idea of having conversations with people that may be work related or also about them will really assist you in a career path. So look for opportunities to have conversations with people and have conversations with people about topics that you find interesting. So in my case, it was economics. It became real estate, and certainly it was outdoor activities, and I'm still active in an outdoor community here in British Columbia and Vancouver. And so it is, when you have conversations and when you put yourself out there to hear what other people want to say and to understand what motivates other people, you'll develop opportunities that will unlock work opportunities for you in career paths that you might otherwise not be available to you in the absence of those communications. So, if you stay inside and don't reach out to people, or don't, right now we can't physically be around other people, but there's certainly opportunities online, this being one of them. for example, where conversations happen. And it's that you overlay your academic credentials and knowledge with, that will create opportunities for you, that will lead to jobs and will lead to a satisfying career.
Greg, I have one of our students, Justine, who wants to unmute. She'd like
Oh,
to ask you
sure.
a question.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah,
ahead,
go
go ahead,
ahead,
Justine.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for the presentation. So I was wondering, I've done a fair bit of co-ops with the federal government, and I was wondering, I know you seem to have a preference for working for the government, and I was wondering if you had maybe a suggestion to, like, is there anything that I could really develop from working in the private sector? Because I have one more co-op that I'd like to do, and I'm not sure if I should be doing it because I have an opportunity with the federal government again, or if I should try and do private.
So
great question.
Yeah, it is. Thanks, Justine. So the opportunities that I've seen and the people that I work with today, the vast majority of them that are currently in public service have spent time in the private sector at one time or another. And having spent some time in the private sector, you bring knowledge on how business operates to the public sector, and it helps you in your public sector work. Invariably, it does. So I would say to you, yeah, look for a private sector opportunity. Try out the private sector for a while, and then consider the public sector later.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Greg, I think you mentioned on our prep, we discussed something about stamina and how the private sector builds stamina. You'd mentioned you were working when you were at commercial real estate from 6:30 to 10:30 at night. Not saying that I recommend that, but it must bring some benefit.
Right.
Like stamina.
So just to be clear, when I describe that as work, that involved quite often client entertaining after office hours, if you will, but it was still work, right? So I was out talking at that time to prospective clients or tenants and trying to convince them to do business with me. And so in the private sector, that involves dinners, it involves sports events, or it can. And in my case, it was Canucks. It was locally here in Canucks. And so I'd get home at 10:30, and then I'd be in the office the next morning at 7. And you do that 3 or 4 nights a week. And so that idea of stamina is something that you learn, or I learned in the MA program at SFU, because there was a lot of long hours, certainly studying, learning material, and preparing for exams or preparing for a thesis. So it bodes well now, later in your career, when you don't have to do that, but you can when needed. So occasionally I put in long hours still, though my current employer recognizes that. So, for example, in previous years, I would be presenting to community groups or otherwise leading meetings that would be, members of the public, that wouldn't end until 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. And it'd work during the day, and then you go out afterwards. Quite often council meetings run late in the evenings now. But my current employer, the City of Vancouver, recognizes that those hours can be outside of the normal sort of employment terms, if you will, or normal hours that might be expected for an employer. And so they're quite mindful of that, and they provide a number of means to either recover that time back or otherwise be compensated for it.
Greg, just some recommendations. So the city is, like all other governments, have their human resource mechanisms. Any advice in terms of how to, not to circumvent that? I mean, obviously you have to apply through the city and human resources, but tips on getting in and pathways.
Yeah, so organizations, the bigger they are, the more harder and more difficult it is to to find a way in without at least having some knowledge of how the organization operates within. And so that comes from this idea of networking and being aware of people, you know, someone that you can call up like me or like other people that you may know that work in an organization that you're interested in joining. And so those opportunities, those discussions can lead to wayfinding for people. So to settle onto a particular department, branch, or otherwise office within the large organization that may be seeking a person with skills like yours it's a great method to do it. You still have to go through the application process. So when I say I was headhunted by the City of Vancouver, I wasn't alone in going through a pretty rigorous interview process. I had panels that I had to sit through. So the idea of understanding the organization that you are seeking employment with is important, because when you get to those interviews, the group that are evaluating you and considering whether or not to give you a opportunity to work with them, you know, they want to believe, and they want to understand whether or not you're committed to the organization that you're working for, and whether or not you understand the organization that you're going to work for. So those type of discussions will help you. You may find out about jobs that will be soon posted or otherwise made available, and then you're ready to pounce on them when it happens.
Great, that's great advice. I guess like maybe you can speak from personal experience, and maybe recommendations to students as well on how to approach people. Like say they want to learn more about a certain department or about a certain position. How would you recommend students approach those people? In what ways? And you know, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, it's always daunting, huh? I remember, you know, like I described sort of that first process when I was a recent MA grad around, you know, sampling local industries, calling people up. And, you know, I got names from people I knew. So I'm like, do you know anybody in private wealth management? I reached out to family members. I reached out to people that I knew in the community group that I was involved in. So kind of mountaineering, outdoor activities, and asked people, hey, you know, do you know anybody that works in this industry? And then I got a name. Once you get a name, you can look them up. And generally people, if you approach them, are quite receptive. And so, you know, the discussion that I used was, hey, I'm a recent grad. I'm contemplating what type of industry that I want to start my career in, and yours is one of them. And I understand that you know, you've been in the industry, your industry, for a number of years, and I wonder if you could give me an advice on how to find a position and help me understand whether or not that this particular industry is one that I'm interested in or that I would find rewarding. And offer to buy them a coffee. And if they say no, call them back. Call them back a week later and go, hey, I know you said no last week, but you know, I really would like to meet with you. And if they say no again, say, well, you know, do you know anybody that in your organization that you think would be willing to meet with me to talk about your corporation, organization, and or industry? And, you know, put yourself out there. And so, you know, through the process, once you get that face-to-face interview or face-to-face discussion, be it over a coffee, over lunch, or Zoom, I suppose now, you know, you need to describe who you are as a person. You need to describe and ask them and try to show them how you can help them.
So in some ways, it almost sounds like an informal interview of sorts.
Yeah, well, it's a sales process, right? You're selling yourself, and you know, it's likely that grads don't have a lot of sales background, but you know, it's no different than finding business, digging business up. If you're an entrepreneur, you know, you go out and you create the opportunity for you, and it's not easy to do, and you're going to hear no a lot. But what I learned in my commercial brokerage career was no is one step closer to a yes. It's an often repeated colloquialism, but it's true. And so you get 100 no's, you get one yes. Those 100 people that said no to you, maybe next time one of them will say yes to you.
Thanks so much.
Greg, I'm going to further Carmen's question a little bit, and actually maybe connect something in terms of, it's the theme of being genuine, and that's what I'm hearing from you, because a lot of our students are are shy, because they feel like, do I try and impress someone like yourself with some knowledge that I have? I mean, how do I approach you? I've just finished my undergrad. I don't have much work experience. I'd really like to be involved in the urban planning department in some way.
Yeah.
How do what questions do I ask Greg Hamilton, who's been in the industry for quite a while, and not make a fool out of myself?
Right. Nobody's going to make a fool out of yourself, because we've all been there. Every one of us that are working have started our careers at one point. And many of us bear the scars of that process. And I mean that it's true. It's daunting to call up somebody you don't know. It's difficult to do, and it's gut wrenching. It can be gut wrenching. What if this person says no? Oh, it's so disappointing. I got to know. It's true. But sooner or later, if you do it enough, you're going to get a yes. And that becomes an opportunity for you to help that person understand who you are, and help that person or help you understand the particular industry that person is in, or area of work. So, questions you can ask are really just, hey, how, tell me about yourself. How'd you get into the business? How'd you get into this industry? Tell me about some of the work that you do. Are you from here? Aren't you from here? And get people talking about who they are. And what I find in those type of conversations is when people understand a little bit about whom you are, they're more willing to help you.
Thanks very much, Greg.
Yeah. I hope that was helpful.
Well, very, very much so.
Yeah.
The last bit I'm going to ask is just any further credentialing that you've seen out there, whether it's at the city level, private level, that you've taken notice of and would like to tell us about.
Yeah. So in my particular industry, there's there's certainly credentials that people carry. I'm far enough in my career that those credentials aren't always required or needed. They frankly become signaling mechanisms that you are part of a group of professionals. And so there's many different ways. You need to find the ones that are relevant to the industry that you want to work in. So they could be things like project planning, project management. They can be things like environmental business practice accreditation. They can be things like National Association of Industrial and Office Property Professionals. I'm a member of a group called Lambda Alpha International, which is an organization of land economists that are primarily interested or otherwise found their careers in land development of one sort, either through public planning or also on the development side. Or on the regulatory side within that. And it's these type of organizations that once you find and you can become a member of, will assist you in career growth and opportunities.
Thanks. That's exactly what I want. Thank you very much, Greg. So, I mean, as always, this hour has whipped by very quickly. We're at 1:29. So I'm going to sort of leave it open for final questions, if anyone has some. My final thought, though, Greg, is your thoughts about LinkedIn and having our students here maybe approach you. And I always tell anyone who's been part of an alumni speak
Yeah.
to just mention that you were here, and if it was
Yeah.
okay to connect with you.
I hope people reach out to me. I want people to reach out to me because I'm quite interested in who MA graduates are in economics, and if I can help in any way, I will, to get people going and land a career here in Vancouver and help to build our community.
So many of our students here are undergrads,
Yeah.
who have finished their undergrad. So I
Yeah.
would assume the same goes for them.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, there is. I don't differentiate between grad or undergrad students. I've been
Fantastic.
both. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. By all means,
well,
reach out and I'll do what I can to help you.
Thank you so much, Greg. So at this point, I want to say thank you again from myself and Carmen and everyone else here. Absolutely amazing. Thank you. Again, if you do want to reach out, I just want to say, if there's an opportunity and somebody tells you to reach out to them, I would, especially as a person who's in this environment and looking to grad. Even if you're not graduating this year or this semester, I would highly encourage that. I would ask you guys to also join the Simon Fraser Economics LinkedIn group. That's how we connect with all of our alumni. So please join the Simon Fraser Economics LinkedIn first, and then reach out to Mr. Hamilton accordingly.
Yeah.
Sorry, Greg, you got last words?
Yeah. Just actually, final last words. Your classmates make a difference too. So I'm still in touch with classmates that I graduated with over 20 years ago at SFU. I've traveled to their homes. I've seen, their businesses. I stay in touch with them. We share pictures of our families and stuff like that. So the friends that you make at university, as long as you make an effort and put effort into those relationships, there'll be lifelong relationships, and opportunities can present themselves there. So thanks very much for the opportunity. I hope, if nothing else, this has been a bit of wisdom, and feel free to call me up or otherwise contact me to practice those people skills.